We've just seen a video of Ryan coming clean about his use or lack of use of PEDs, so let's dissect that a bit. In the video he says that for his match against Lachlan Adair he had been using PEDs. For this match he says he weighed 104 kilograms, and as far as I know Lachlan is somewhere around 110 kilograms or more, so at least 6 kilograms difference. But we can see a pretty clean difference in terms of the lean muscle mass of the two people involved. And I think that Ryan is slightly taller than Lachlan, so from that, body weight and visible muscle mass, it seems fair to say that of the two, Ryan is at a higher body fat level and more bloated. Especially when we consider that Ryan seems to train very specifically without an intention or result of growing much muscle tissue outside of the immediately involved areas, which, as I have said many times, is probably not the best way for everybody to train in any sport if they aim for success, stability and longevity within it, especially if they are not taking PEDs. And of course in this match Lachlan won easily, but that itself is not really fair data to use to claim that he just trains better. There are many other factors involved there. In addition to the visual cues of being bloated and higher body fat, Ryan says that he had trouble with aching joints, difficulty breathing, skin issues and back acne. First, the joint aches. This is a strange one following typical sensible steroid use. Normally steroids actually seem to lower aches and pains in the joints. Low testosterone can lead to joint pain, but I would think that low testosterone would be a little bit opposite to what you would expect using anabolic steroids, assuming it was done sensibly, which we will look at in a second. But it's also possible and perhaps more likely that the joints ache because he decided that being on gear meant that he could train much more and much more intensely, which can be true, but if everything surrounding the gear use, like recovery, diet and the training system itself, are not all aligned towards that more enhanced training, you could quite easily end up overtraining and getting aches and pains through that. Which brings us to the next point, difficulty breathing. Of course, as you get bigger and heavier, the tax on the lungs is greater. You'll see most top-level bodybuilders breathing just as hard and laboured as the most morbidly obese people. But Ryan is not really either of those things at this point, so difficulty breathing could be down to a couple of other issues. First, poor training. As you get heavier and train more, you need to work on improving your capacity to exist within these new parameters. I do make a lot of speculations based on the very limited information I have seen about Ryan's training, and I'm entirely aware it may be the wrong overall idea, but it's all I have to work with. But I have not seen Ryan do any real conditioning or cardio/endurance-based training. I know Devon got a lot of criticism for training endurance above all else, which I don't think he really did, but just doing higher reps is not the kind of endurance I mean here. I mean old-fashioned cardiovascular ability, the ability for the heart to pump blood and oxygen around the body for extended periods of time and do this under stress, which doing only heavy max lifts on a cable or table time is not going to directly target. Most top-level athletes in most sports do at least some level of cardio work, even Levan Sagnishvili, even if that is just sitting on an air bike at the beginning of the workout. And then we can look at other sports like powerlifting and weightlifting, which are even less demanding of cardiovascular ability due to the very short burst requirements of effort, and most of the athletes there do at least do some kind of cardio work. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, in sports like MMA, you'll see absolutely tons of cardio and conditioning work being done because the sport itself requires the athlete to be able to survive for extended periods, whilst very frequently outputting bursts of strength and effort, which, although not quite to the extent of, is a model that I think arm wrestling more closely resembles. Assuming that you are not flash pinned, you are going to have to hold a position under load and periodically output bursts of force from an exhausted position. So you need that level of ability to hold and withstand an opponent, and on top of that to overpower them, which means on top of just being strong, you need to work on building that underlying engine that fuels the ability to use that strength. But back to PEDs, which might be a more likely cause of his difficulty breathing. Used haphazardly, anabolic steroids, especially testosterone and nandrolone decanoate, can bloat people quite a lot, which adds size and weight to the body very quickly without giving the lungs time to adapt to this new stress. And they can also cause acne, which pretty much everybody knows at this point can be a common side effect of the drugs. Of course, I don't know exactly what Ryan took, but whatever it was didn't seem to work out that well for him or his performance. If we compare him from the Lachlan match on gear to a more recent display where he claims to be off entirely, we can see quite a clear difference in size. But again, I don't think he had gained or lost that much actual muscle tissue, especially with the type of training he seems to do, which is quite anti-muscle building, or at least in a very limited areas which he doesn't seem to have lost much size around, like the forearms and the arms. So, to sum that up, I think the main cause of the issues Ryan felt using gear was that he used whatever he used in a less than optimal way. If he had needed to gain weight, regardless of the quality of the weight, perhaps the bloat would be justified, but just eating more might have been more comfortable. If he was a bodybuilder or even a powerlifter who did the kind of training that thoroughly evoked hypertrophy in a large range of muscles, then what he took might have made more sense. But he is not. He's in a sport that, unless you train in a very generalized way, like Coach Ray does outside of table time, there is very little full-body stimulation that would generate overall growth, and taking steroids that may be more suitable for that seems to be just a bit of a waste. So, what's the better strategy for a more specific and precise type of athlete? Put quite simply, slow and low. I think that if, like Ryan, you have quite a lot of sports experience at the time you start to use PEDs, you don't really want to make huge drastic changes to everything right away. You may gain some strength and leverage from the extra body weight, but if you gain 10 kilograms in a short period of time, the body will have a very hard time readjusting to all of these new levers and positions. Everything will feel slightly off from where you spent years performing them before. But if you slowly gain new tissue alongside the training, the adaptation should come much more smoothly, and you'll be able to maximize more of the new tissue rather than building a huge surplus and only being able to utilize a portion of it right away. And I think this is quite a big difference in the mindsets of a lot of East versus West athletes. From what I've seen, Eastern countries, by which I really mean Eastern Europe, Russia and Georgia, or places that have been inspired by these Soviet methodologies, they have a lot more of a long-term systematic plan in the works when it comes to sports. Just look at Shardara Arm Sport in Kazakhstan. They built an entire dedicated training base devoted to training and teaching and practicing arm wrestling. This is just the same level as the commitment they have to weightlifting. They spent years studying and developing, including doping, and they ended up with one of the most dominant teams in the world. Eastern Germany had this, Bulgaria had this, Russia has this in megadoses, China has it in gigadoses, and now we see Italy pushing weightlifting to greater successes than ever before, through their dedicated schools pumping out athletes. All of these countries with invested long-term plans for success are proving to be the ones who come out on top. But countries like America, who do not have this kind of systematic setup except for sports like basketball and football, do not have the same level of international success over periods of time. And alongside this system to support and produce top-level athletes, some of the most popular drugs used were simple oral steroids like turinabol, dianabol and stanozolol. And why? Because they're cheap, they work, they make you stronger without adding excess weight, and they clear the system quickly for testing. So then I guess it really depends on what type of sport you want arm wrestling to be. If you want that highly organized style of sport that ends up in the Olympics, you'd be much better training and doping with a longer term, less immediately extreme mindset. So more small drugs, less megadoses of things that make you huge. But if you do want that flashy WWE style of sport with all of the biggest athletes, then maybe you really do need the massive doses that feed into that showy event. But I don't think this bodes well at all for the health and longevity of the athletes involved. So is gear necessary for arm wrestling? I think that in all sports, to be at the absolutely top level, you need to take whatever advantage you can get. I'm not sure when the curtain fell and the public perception decided that steroids and other PEDs were immoral cheating, but optimizing training and diet was entirely fair game. But the amount of PEDs required really depends on what is expected of the athlete, so that comes down to what me and you pay the most money to support, which does not seem to be the WAF-style tournaments with minimal, just enough to train slightly better doses. For the average lower-level athlete, I don't think taking the kind of doses that blow you up in a short amount of time do very much at all except possibly make you look better, but that itself is not a very sport-specific thing. If you are going to use PEDs, then all I can suggest is that you use the minimal amount required for your plans and aim for the long-term plan rather than immediate progress. And that's all I have to say on that. Check out my Patreon, and in the next few days I'll release a full multi-month plan for a strength training system for arm wrestling, beginning with general health and athleticism and culminating with absolute strength and power on the table. But otherwise, that's it, and I'll see you later.